Good morning, everyone. I see some familiar faces here, and I see some non-familiar faces as well. But you know, as the Irish poet W.B. Yeats said, there's no such thing as strangers. There's just friends who you haven't met yet. I think it's a good way of looking at it. So to friends and not to strangers. As Morton pointed out earlier on, my presentations are usually a lot longer than that. I speak at 2 business schools and my lectures are 4 hours long. But don't worry, I won't bore you with those. Once I get going, I'm like Castro, right? I'm Il Duce on the balcony. Once you get going, I can't stop, okay? So I have condensed it down to just a little bit more than 30 minutes. And I'm just going to outline my basic argument of why I think marketing today is screwed in the short to medium term. Thanks, Montserrat, for actually dropping the F-bomb, because that was the other thing I wanted to say. I may swear a little bit, and if I do, it's not meant for dramatic effect. It's just sometimes I get a bit passionate about what we're talking about. And anyway, I think anybody who works in the print industry who doesn't swear cannot be trusted. Okay? So I'm going to outline what we're talking about, and if you're interested to find out more, grab hold of me. Please come and find me, and let's discuss in more length, in more detail, preferably while holding a glass of falling down water. So, this is me. I am G. Ranasinha. What am I doing here? Because I'm a marketer. We run a marketing agency called Kexino. We're based in Strasbourg in France, which, if you've been watching the news, Morton, that's the other reason why I'm here, is to state political asylum in Denmark. Thank you. Our agency leads around marketing strategy and a thing called behavioral science, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. 80% of our clients are based in the US, even though we're in Strasbourg. Apparently there's this thing called the interwebs. I don't know if you've heard of it, but apparently it's quite popular. Most of our clients are not household names. You wouldn't have heard of them, though there are some that you would have heard of. Here's some logos. And we have been quoted and featured in these sorts of publications as well. Question, can anybody tell me who this gentleman is? Who is the statue of? Anybody know? Well done. Yes, Mr. R gets a prize. That's a guy called Johannes Gutenberg, and is probably the reason why we have jobs. I've been in the printing industry, I've actually added it up, for 30 years. I started when I was 8, okay, clearly. Over the years, I've always been on the vendor side. So over the years, I've worked either directly or indirectly with companies such as Crossfield Electronics, Dycomed, Cytex, Creo, Cytex, Kodak, Zytron, Dalim Software, ESCO, GMG, and probably loads more that I've forgotten or chosen not to admit to. In 2007, I left the printing industry to start my own marketing agency with 2 colleagues. And yet, print hasn't left my life. 17 years later, after having left the printing industry, I'm still working, talking, consulting, and marketing print. Our agency has worked with vendors such as Epson, ICS, Global Graphics, ZAR, and CGS. Even today, we have clients who are printing companies. So I like to think of myself somewhat as Michael Corleone in Godfather 3, you know? Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. Anyway, that's enough of me. You're not here to come about me. We'll talk about something else. We're here to talk about conflict. And what I'm going to talk about is conflict in business. I'm going to give you 3 examples. Conflict number 1. Who works in sales and who works in marketing? We all know the conflict that have sales and marketing, okay? Marketing looks at sales and they say, these guys don't do anything. They get up at like 10 o'clock in the morning. And then they go off, take a client to dinner for a Michelin star meal and spend like £1,000 buying a bottle of Petrus. And then they stand there like this, waiting for the white hot lead to land in their lap. And then they just get the client to sign on the dotted line. And then they take these suitcases full of cash home for commission. What an easy life. They haven't got a clue. And then sales look at marketing and say, marketing haven't got a clue. They're producing all of this content which is totally useless. I'm speaking to customers every day at the coalface. The marketing stuff is just totally irrelevant. And the leads, oh my, how long have you got? They think these things are warm leads. They're about as warm as downtown Copenhagen in December. And the difference is, obviously, the methodology. Sales is looking short-term. Marketing is looking sort of more long-term. Marketing is broad targeting, positioning the product as well as the brand for tomorrow, while sales is more narrow targeting, focusing on the present, usually 30, 60, 90. So a second conflict in business is a conflict between finance and marketing. So to put it really simplistically, finance thinks marketing's job is to waste money, while marketing thinks finance's job is not to spend any money ever for anything, right? Now I think the conflict is partly rooted in language. Marketing uses jargon like salience and ESOV and distinctive brand assets and all this sort of stuff that goes flying over the head of anybody to do with finance. They don't know. Just in the same way that finance uses terms like balance sheet and P&L and EBITDA, which marketing doesn't understand. EBITDA, marketing could even spell EBITDA, let alone tell you what it was, right? And then there's attribution, right? Which marketing and finance define as being very, very different things, okay? Did a revenue event occur as a direct result of a marketing effort? Or would it have happened anyway? Right? Even perfect attribution doesn't tell us anything about marketing effectiveness. It talks about efficiency, which I'm going to come to in a bit. And efficiency is basically how fast are we spending our budget, right? But actually, marketing and finance are not totally alienated. They do actually have, they're like warring siblings, if you like, okay? They're closer on certain things than many of each other think they are, but they just go about it in different ways. But the third conflict, and the conflict that I'm going to talk about, is a conflict between buyers and brands. Our customers and ourselves, which is probably the most important conflict there is. And why do we want to talk about it? Because for most businesses out there, what we should be doing either isn't working or certainly isn't working as well as it should be. The effectiveness of our marketing is continuing to fall. And I posit that that is the reason for that, the underlying reason for that, is that the vast majority of marketing communications that we are producing is bland, safe, superficial, and instantly forgettable. As marketers, we thought the solution to our problem was going to be technology. But that's clearly not the case, especially with online. We have all of these tools, all of this MarTech, custom audience profiles, remarketing, tags, geolocation, AI, all the rest of it. And yet we're doing less and less by spending more and more. Less than 50% of digital ads are viewed at all. Most of the ads that we see on programmatic are viewed by bots. We're spending more and more money for bots to look at our ads and believe the statistics that have been given to us by the media channels themselves. The kids are in charge of the candy store. Less than 2% of people exposed to digital advertising converting to customers. I've got citations at the bottom there. You can Google it and tell me more. So clearly, what's going on? Marketers don't know what they're doing. No, that's far too contentious. I don't mean that. What I mean is marketers don't know what they're doing wrong. Today, they reckon in 2024, marketing and advertising are going to spend $1 trillion. We're spending more money on marketing and advertising than ever before. At the same time, there is plenty of empirical evidence that shows how it continues to be less effective, but more interestingly or more concerningly, is how it's more disliked by customers than at any time in the past. And the result is 86% of marketing output is not remembered in any way. Our marketing is generic, intrusive, annoying. Because of we have to use tracking scripts and remarketing tags and third-party cookies, which mean we now have had to have in place GDPR and CCPA and DSG and DCIA and PIPL and goodness knows whatever other acronyms are down the pike. And we have 2 billion people who install an ad blocker on their web browser. Okay? So, where I think we're going wrong is that we think marketing has changed. But actually it hasn't, not really. Now the tactics have changed, of course. Tactics change all the time, change every 5 minutes. Tactics always change. But marketing hasn't changed because the psychological and emotional drivers that form the basic mental structures of how and why human beings buy things hasn't changed. The challenge of understanding buyers, the strategic questions of target, position, and objective are exactly the same as they were last week, last month, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Well, people will turn around and me say, yeah, that's all very well, G, but the world's changed. And now that we have a digitally centric marketing arsenal using techniques such as individualization and personalization, which are 2 totally different things, I hope everybody agrees. Okay, it means that the old ways, the analog ways, are redundant. The old ways where marketing needed to be informative, engaging, entertaining, and memorable. But while we have more and more ways to reach our audience, we're clearly failing to do that, because if we were, we'd all be high-fiving each other about how great our marketing's working, right? And that's because our technology-centered marketing tools and our rational marketing brains are ignoring 50% of the work we should be doing as marketers. That 50% of the work is working on the irrational, emotional components that we as customers use as part of our buying-making process. In effect, what we have today is a data-driven, repeatable, and measurable process. Great. But it's one that's devoid of creativity, emotion, or resonance. And then we moan that our marketing sucks, right? Today's marketing lacks depth and nuance. It's less self-aware, it's less self-referential, and it calls upon fewer cultural references. Instead of seeking to deliver an emotional reaction to charm and to captivate, what most of our marketing is doing, it's coming from the position of literalism. And think of your own experience, right? You think back to a particular memory that you have in your life. Supposing you're driving in your car and a song comes on the radio that you haven't heard for ages, okay? You're instantly transported back to a day and time when that song meant something. You were surrounded by certain people. It was an apocryphal time of your life, right? Sometimes when you get a smell and it evokes something from years ago, right? Those memory structures are so deeply ingrained in our psyche, not because we read a frigging bullet point, it's because it was formed from an emotional reaction. The strongest memories are built upon emotions, and yet we're ignoring those sort of things now. We're chasing efficiency metrics as businesses instead of effectiveness metrics, okay? And by doing that, businesses end up looking and saying the same as each other. If we look at most of the marketing we see today, imagine you had two pieces of marketing communication from two different vendors in the same category, okay? 90% of the time, if you covered up the logos of those two pieces of marketing, the messaging was interchangeable. There's nothing distinctive, there's nothing differentiated about what's going on. That's a problem. People are confusing, they're conflating effectiveness with efficiency. And one of them gets you points and one of them doesn't. So what am I talking about effectiveness and efficiency? I think it helps to sort of clarify what I'm talking about, okay? So effectiveness, when I say effectiveness, I'm talking about how well we're doing to achieve a particular goal, right? How successful we are in delivering what we set out to do. Chasing effectiveness means we're looking to maximize the outcome of a particular, in this case, marketing tactic or set of tactics. It's about achieving the biggest success we can. Efficiency, on the other hand, is a ratio. Efficiency is about how much input we make to deliver a particular output. Okay? So efficiency-driven businesses are not looking to get the best result from their effort or investment. They're looking to get the most positive result from the least amount of effort or investment, which is a totally different proposition. Okay, since efficiency is a ratio between input and output, maximizing efficiency is about reducing input as much as possible to maintain an output. In other words, doing the same for less. But shouldn't our goal be more than that? Shouldn't it be about maximizing outcome, even if we can prove with the numbers that an increase in effort or investment can exponentially outperform whatever target or barrier we set ourselves? This is why I think we're focusing on the wrong stuff and why we should be focusing more on the psychological than the technological. We should not be asking ourselves, how does Instagram work? How does the LinkedIn algorithm work? How does ChatGPT work? We should be asking ourselves, how does the customer work? How does the human mind work? How can we hack that? Now, to do that requires some self-awareness, some self-introspection, and the acknowledgement that we need to question what we've been doing all these years, to question the existing assumptions and processes that have probably been in the company for probably longer than you've been in the company. Here's a great quote that I love from an American neuroscientist from Texas by the name of David Eagleman. We don't think the way we think we think. And what does that mean? We like to think that we all behave rationally, independently, and logically. However, in the real world, that doesn't seem to be true. And businesses in their messaging assume that their targets are rational, pragmatic, and logical. Yet science tells us that an emotional and irrationality is what gets us remembered and what initiates a call to action. The issue is that marketers, well, businesses in general, really, are trying to apply rational and logical thinking to marketing in the way they apply rational and logical thinking to other areas of the business, which makes sense, right? For R&D, for manufacturing, for finance, for all of those things, rational, logical, Newtonian model of 1 + 1 always equals 2, engineering type thinking makes total sense because you have total transparency of each part of the system. And you know how one thing, tweaking one thing affects output. If you're making widgets and you want to make more widgets, you can either increase the efficiency of the system, you can drop the cost of the raw materials of the widget, or it's all very clear. But in marketing, we're not dealing, the target of our actions are not logical, rational entities. We're dealing with people. And there's nothing logical or rational about how we make buying decisions. Not only are they emotionally affected, but they're contextually affected too. Okay? Marketing doesn't work in that Newtonian model. It never has and it never will. And we're trying to make it so, and it'll never work. What's missing from most marketers' toolkits is the implicit and fundamental understanding of human behavior. Now, some people call this behavioral economics or behavioral science, but at the end of the day, it's psychology, right? It's the understanding of the human mind in context. And context is actually an important word in there, because if we better understand these areas of the brain that make these effects, we have a better chance of creating an environment that is more conducive to positive buying decisions. So adding behavioral science thinking allows us to expand the potential solution space to a problem by adding a psychological dimension to the already rational dimensions that we're using. Okay? You heard about like left brain and right brain people, right? It's actually a myth that's been perpetuated and carries on going for a long time, right? So like left brain people are better at maths and right brain people are quicker at learning musical instruments and that sort of thing. And we used to think that the brain separated pragmatism and emotions very nice and neatly into two halves. And like one side of the brain did this and the other side of the brain did that. Now this was debunked largely in about 1960, and it's actually a lot more complicated. Well, who'd have thunk, right? It's a lot more complicated than that. What actually happens is the areas of the brain which are concerned with emotion versus pragmatism are not conveniently geolocated in specific areas of the brain. They're all over the place. However, it's a nice way to illustrate a model. So rather than talk left brain, right brain, marketers now talk about system 2 and system 1 thinking, okay? So it's still that same concept, but we stop calling it left brain and right brain to stop us looking even more like idiots than we already are. Okay, so System 1 and System 2, it's popularized by a guy called Daniel Kahneman, who is a behavioral psychologist, the father of behavioral science, if you like. He was a Nobel laureate for his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, a few years ago. Anyway, basically, it's a behavioral science, it's psychology rebranded, right? It's nothing more than that. So the concept is the human brain can be divided into, let's call them 2 cognitive processing modes. We have system 2, which is analytical, logical, and concerned with details. It's slow, it's deliberate, it's conscious, but it requires intentional effort. You know, when you're working on a problem, something analytical, something deliberate, and you're fatigued, that's because of your system 2, okay? Because the brain is like 2% of the body weight of an average person, yet it uses up to 25% of the calorific intake of what you're doing, okay? So the job of the brain is actually to be effortless. When I say effortless, I don't mean without effort. I mean to conserve as much possible energy as possible to push this stuff over to what we call System 1. Okay, System 1 understands the world through a different language. It understands it through emotions, intuition, and relationships. It's fast, it's automatic, it's intuitive. Okay, and it operates with little and no effort. Now, in primal species, we would call this instinct. Okay, but for us, there is some of that involved still, especially if you talk to a behavioral psychologist. But a lot of these things are built across our own experiences and patterns that we find or make up in data. Quite often we'll make up patterns in data when there isn't actually patterns to see in the first place. Okay? It's where, if you're a psychologist, you start talking about things like cognitive biases and heuristics and other big words that make you sound very important. So what we have in marketing today is a preponderance of System 2 directed single direction communications which totally avoids System 1 engagement. But the problem with this is that System 1 that understands empathy, irony, humour, and all the other emotional traits to be considered for long-term brand building. Effective marketing today, just like effective marketing has been in the past, is a combination of the two. It's not either or, it's and. It's System 1 and System 2 activation. But 99% of marketers are totally ignoring System 1. And they're wondering why marketing fails to deliver. So, just quickly, I'll give you 3 examples of behavioral science thinking. Number 1 is the best salesperson, which is an anecdote from a book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by a guy called Robert Cialdini. It's another famous book if you're into customer psychology and behavioral science. And Robert Cialdini was actually tasked with looking at this particular company. It was a company that made fire alarms for the home. And there was one particular salesperson who was thrashing all of the other salespeople in closure rates. He was wiping the floor with everyone. And nobody could work out what he was doing and how he was doing it. So Cialdini went with him as like a ride-along. He was like shadowing him. Okay? So he went to see all of these homeowners to try to sell them a fire alarm. And the process was exactly the same. He'd get through the door, he'd sit down, he'd open his briefcase, and he'd go, I'm really sorry, but my presentation binder, I've left it in the car. Would you mind if I'll just be 30 seconds. If you just hang on there, I'll just see myself out, get the binder and come back again and then we can start. Is that okay? So homeowner says, yeah, sure, that's no problem. Okay? That's how we would start every single sale. And that, as it turns out, was part of the secret of his success. Because when they was quizzed on this, well, why do you do this thing, the briefcase thing? Well, why? And he says, who do you freely let in and out of your house on your own, on their own? Someone you trust. I want to be trusted before I try to sell them anything. Right? If they're putting people into a state of mind even before they heard their pitch. Right? Next one. Nespresso pods. Like them or love them, whether you're a coffee snob or not, Nespresso pods are wonderful things, right? But the way Nespresso sells them is a thing called anchoring bias. It's also known as framing. When you see the prices of a Nespresso pod, they range anything from about 35 euro cents to 50 euro cents, okay? Or I suppose in Denmark it's about 3,500 euro. Right? But for everybody else, it's somewhere depending, up to about 50 cents, maybe a bit more depending on how much of a snob you are about coffee. But they talk about a single pod. The thing is about a single pod as a customer is there's no other correlation, a comparison that we can make with buying coffee as a single pod. When you go to the supermarket and you buy a jar, I don't know how many cups of coffee the jar makes, you only know that the jar is going to cost you 6, 7 euros, whatever it is. You don't know how many cups you get out of it. So what happens in our brains when we make that comparison, we don't compare it to the Nescafes and the Maxwell houses and stuff that we buy from our supermarket. We compare it to the only other point of reference that we have buying a single cup of coffee, which is from a coffee shop, or even Starbucks, if we have to drink hot brown water and call it coffee, right? So, how much is a Starbucks? I mean, I talk about Starbucks coffee. I'm talking about coffee, not this Chocolocca Frappo little nonsense with dessert. Not really a coffee, right? But an actual coffee is going to cost you $2.50, $3 maybe, okay? Versus 35 cents. Well, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? What? And if I buy 400 capsules, they'll give me the machine for free? Well, I'm making money. I mean, this is wonderful. It's a no-brainer. Yet, if Nespresso took whatever was inside these things and put them in a jar and said, here's 100 Nespresso pods worth of coffee, no one's going to spend $50 on a jar of coffee, are they? But they're quite happy to spend 35 cents. It's the same information being presented in a totally different way. Anchoring bias. And my last example is Uber, or also public mass transit. Okay, the genius of Uber wasn't anything to do with being able to order a taxi on your phone. That's nothing particularly wonderful. The genius of Uber was the map on the app. Because what's the problem when you telephone a cab office and ask for a taxi? You call, you put the phone down, and now you've no idea how long it's going to be before the taxi comes. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. But if you're calling a cab, it's quite often like time dependent. Maybe you're trying to catch a flight. You need to be somewhere, right? So you call them back up and you go, did you get it? Where are they? Yeah. He's just around the corner. He'll be there in a couple of minutes. You're tense, you're nervous, right? On Uber, you can say, oh, he's a kilometre away. He's stuck in that in those roadworks just north of town. Oh, I've got time to have a nice overpriced cup of coffee while I'm waiting. Right? That was the genius of the Uber map. Okay? As it turns out, as people, we are much more bothered by the uncertainty of waiting than the actual duration of a wait. Okay? Mass transit, the single biggest uptick in customer experiences for public transport in like the 30 countries they've tested it, so that's buses, trams, trains, metros, whatever, is not to put on more rolling stock, not to increase the headcount, get more people working, clean the trains. No. The single biggest thing they could do to increase customer satisfaction was to put those dot matrix indicators on the bus stops and in the train platforms so that you knew, oh crap, I've just missed that train, but it doesn't matter because I only have 7 minutes to wait before the next one. And now it's 6. And I have that comfort. Notice that we haven't changed the wait. You're still waiting the same amount of time. But now it's the perception is less frustrating. What the human brain hates in this situation isn't duration, it's uncertainty. Right? So, we like to think we understand customers, but many times we're either listening too closely to them or we're listening to them about the wrong things. And yes, that does mean that I think market research is full of crap. And yes, it does mean that I think being customer-centric is full of crap. And we can talk about that afterwards if you like. It's largely nonsense. We need to better understand how customers think, how they make decisions, and the contextual and emotional levers we can use that act as variables to affect the final result. So, to summarize, what we're doing is not working. It's either not working or it's not working as well as it should be. Technology is an arms race. We've all got the same technical capabilities. The technology is irrelevant. It's a tool, okay? It's not about the tools, right? If I spent $2,000 on some Japanese chef's knives, it doesn't make me Gordon Ramsay, does it? Right? It's not about the tools, okay? And finally, we can't keep producing this generic, vanilla, soulless marketing communication that looks like everybody else and isn't remembered, or more importantly, recollected by in-market prospects when they're ready to buy. We need a little bit of that system 1 into the system 2 when we're making our marketing cocktail. And I thank you for your patience, because we have gone over time, but I did warn you at the beginning. And I'll leave you with a quote from the neuroanatomist Jill Bolt Taylor. It's also used by a guy called Antonio Damasio in his book Descartes' Error. What Jill Bolt Taylor says is, we think that we are thinking creatures that feel. But in reality, we are feeling creatures that think. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is me. So I thank you for your time.